Hi, boys and girls, detectives and togas. Today we're going to read chapter 16 and 17, and we're going to find out what has happened to, or who has tried to get Rufus in trouble, because now we know that it wasn't Rufus who wrote Caius as a dumbbell. We also know it wasn't Caius who wrote Caius as a dumbbell. So we have figured that much out. The boys had to go twice around the State Archives building on the Forum before they found on a quiet side lane the entrance to the censor's office. At the door stood an armed guard, a tough-looking young man. "What are you kids after?" he asked harshly. Mucius repeated the formula they had decided on. "We must speak to the censor's officials," he said as innocently as possible. "What's your business with them?" the guard asked, leaning indifferently against the wall. He took off his helmet and wiped his brow, for the day had grown rather warm. "We are bringing an important message," Mucius lied with a straight face. "A sensational story," Antonius added, nodding vigorously. "Do you have credentials?" the guard asked, plunking his helmet on his head. "We don't need any," Mucius said. "The story is about us." "Then go to the devil," the guard said without interest. The boys retreated to a shady corner under the colonnades of the State Archives building, where they could keep an eye on the guard. Their plan had fallen flat. By all their calculations, the guard should have admitted them when they claimed to have important news. Now they would have to think up something else. Caius, whom they had taken along on a probation basis, suggested pushing the guard aside and running into the building. "If you don't care to try it, I'll do it by myself," he said, throwing fierce looks at the brawny fellow lounging in the doorway. "You think you're Hercules," Publius scoffed. "No violence," Mucius said. "That would spoil everything. We must use our heads." Julius nodded. "Let's tell him the truth," he proposed, rubbing his nose thoughtfully. "You do that?" Mucius decided. They approached the entrance again. The guard had sat down on the base of a column and was lovingly polishing his sword, which already gleamed like a metal mirror in the sunlight. He looked up in surprise as the boys trooped up to him once more. "So you're here again," he said. "We have a great favor to beg of you," Julius began flatteringly. "Yes?" the guard asked skeptically. "Listen, kids, I'm just on guard here. I can't do anything for you." "We would not ask you to," Julius said, standing on his dignity. "All we wanted to do was check something with the official who takes the late news at night." "Do you mean Megabates?" the guard said. "Yes, he's the one we mean," Publius grinned. "A Greek, isn't he?" Mucius asked quickly. He recognized Megabates as a Greek name. "Can we see him?" Julius asked. "Megabates isn't around yet," the guard replied. "He's on night duty, so he gets his sleep in the morning." "He doesn't live far from here, does he?" Julius asked as at hazard. "If you know him so well, you must know his address too," the guard said slyly. "Of course we know his address," Antonius burst out. "It's just slipped our minds. Sometimes we almost forget where our school is." The guard laughed. He liked the boys. It wasn't too long ago since he himself had played hooky from school on a spring day. "Megabates lives in a house on Patrician Street, right on the corner of Sabura," he said. "But now clear out of here," he roared good-naturedly, and he jokingly raised his sword. "Thank you very much," the boys called as they ran off in high spirits. They turned the corner and were once more in the Forum. The big square was swarming with people who had been lured out by the warmth of this first real spring day. The sun was shining, the sky was a brilliant blue, and a gentle breeze which smelled of spring blew from the south. Everybody looked happy, and the dazzling white togas and tunics the people wore showed that they had fetched out their finest clothes to celebrate so fine a day. But the boys weren't out for a leisurely promenade. They plowed their way through the crowd, using their elbows to good purpose. As they pushed on, Mucius glanced at the gloomy city jail at the foot of the Capitol. "That's where Rufus is," he said, stopping in his tracks. The others stared at the prison. "It must be awful in there," Flavius murmured. "The prisoners are kept deep underground," Antonius said. "Maybe we could dig a tunnel and free Caius." "Free Rufus," Caius suggested. Publius laughed at him. Where would you start to dig? He asked. Right here in the Forum, in front of the whole world. Caius took offense. All you can ever do is make silly jokes, he snorted, starting toward him. It's just that you're too dumb to understand them, Publius retorted, clenching his fist. Be quiet, Mucius warned, stepping between them. People are staring at us. If you want to fight, do it when you're alone. The boys moved on. They made their way to the Senate building, took a less crowded side street, and soon reached the gorge known as the Subura. As they approached the corner of Patrician Street, they saw the building the guard must have referred to. It was a shabby 5-story tenement. The lower story consisted entirely of wretched little stores, mere niches in the building, with goods spread out on the sidewalk. On the corner was a barber's booth. The barber was standing in the street cutting a customer's hair with an enormous pair of shears. The man sat submissively on a stool, and a group of street boys stood around, following the proceedings with interest. Next door there was a butcher shop. The meat hung on big hooks set into the wall. Then came a booth with a goat's head carved in stone above the entrance, indicating that this was where milk was sold. After that came a laundry, a vegetable shop, and a dirty tavern. The boys wondered how to get into the building since they saw no entrance. Finally, Mucius asked the barber where the door was. Around the back, the barber said, jerking his shears over his shoulder toward Patrician Street. At the corner of the building, the boys struck a narrow, well-trodden path, evidently much used by the rightful inhabitants of the place. This path led into the backyard, and from there the tenement did not look quite so ugly as from the front. Along all the stories ran roofed galleries from which, at intervals, tiny open balconies projected. Assorted potted plants sent forth vines and greenery which jutted and trailed over the railings of the balconies. Wooden steps led from the yard up to the galleries. The yard itself was paved with large flagstones, and there was a fountain in the center of it. Off to one side, 3 small girls were jumping rope, kind of like we do at school. They stopped playing when the well-dressed boys came in, and they gaped in wonder. They gaped again. The boys strolled toward the building and took the staircase, whose steps were worn smooth by much traffic. I'll bet nothing but criminals live here, Antonius said. You're letting your imagination run away with you again, Julius said. This is the kind of place where craftsmen and shopkeepers and freed slaves live. The majority of them are Greeks and Arabs. They are not criminals. This was the first time the boys had ever entered a tenement house, and they felt like explorers. On the lowest gallery, they stopped in confusion. A number of doorways covered only by curtains led to the interior of the building. From behind these curtains, they could hear all sorts of noises. Dishes rattling, children whining, shrill women's and horsemen's voices quarreling. Dogs were barking, and somewhere a young man was crooning a sentimental song. There was a smell of cheap soap, burned oil, and onions. Ugh, I feel sick to my stomach, Flavius murmured. No backing down now, Mucius said. We'll never find Megabates in this hive, Flavius said. We'll have to ask, Mucius said, and boldly pulled aside the nearest curtain. They found themselves looking into a tiny kitchen. A sturdy woman was standing over a steaming trough, scrubbing clothes on a wooden board. She looked up, her face flushed with heat and annoyance, and shouted, Get out of here, you rascals! The boys hastily withdrew. The little old man, clad in rags, came along the gallery toward them, walking unsteadily. The boys approached him. Where does Megabates live? They asked. The old man chuckled and started to babble at great length. The boys did not understand so much as a syllable of his speech. He smelled strongly of wine, which made them uneasy, but he seemed eager to be of help, for he went on chattering and pointing upward with a dirty finger. I guess Megabates lives further up, Mucius said to his friends. But where? Publius asked. On the roof? Wait, I have an idea, Julius said, turning to Publius. Do any of you happen to have a charcoal pencil with you? I do, said Publius, producing one from the pocket of his tunic. Julius took possession of the pencil and went over to the wall, calling, Hey, you, to the old man. The man looked at him with a vacant smile. Julius waved the pencil in the air to hold the old fellow's attention, and then he drew on the wall a staircase and after it put a large question mark. The old man realized what Julius wanted, took the pencil from him, and made 5 long dashes beside the question mark. Under these he placed 3 small dashes. Then he pocketed the pencil and reeled off down the stairs. The boys saw him staggering across the yard, heading for the tavern. My pencil, Publius protested. Oh, let him keep the pencil, Mucius said. The old boy has done us a service." "How come?" Caius wanted to know. "What are those marks supposed to mean?" The others laughed at his slowness. "Megabates lives on the 5th floor." "You dummy," Julius explained. "But what are the 3 small dashes for?" Flavius asked. "Oh, maybe the 3rd door," Mucius said hopefully. He had guessed right, for now they noticed that all the doorways were numbered. They climbed the wooden steps to the 5th gallery, where they stopped in front of the door marked 3. 3 lines. Mucius pounded his fist against the curtain, but this action produced no sound at all, merely a dense cloud of dust. Then he called out, "Does Megabates live here?" Whereupon a cross voice replied, "Come in." "I don't think we need to take off our sandals here," Mucius whispered to the others as he entered. Apparently the newspaper man's job was not very highly paid. Megabates' apartment consisted of a single, poorly furnished, windowless room. In one corner was a small open fireplace in which a fire was burning, and in the other corner a straw pallet lay on the floor, probably the bed. Along the walls were nails from which hung clothing and blankets. Megabates was seated at the table with a steaming bowl of peas and sausage, which he was eating slowly. Beside the bowl lay a large piece of bread and a broad-bladed dagger-like knife. The censor's official was a rather pinched-looking elderly man whose pointed gray beard reminded the boys of Xanthippus. He went right on with his meal, and finally he growled with full mouth, "Who are you?" "Are you Megabates?" Mucius asked. "What do you want?" "We have something very important to discuss with you," Mucius said. "I am Megabates, but I cannot discuss anything now." Megabates growled, completely absorbed in his peas and sausage. "Forgive us for disturbing you, but we are in a great hurry," Mucius apologized. "I'm in a hurry, too," Megabates said. "I must get to my office. Come back tomorrow." This seemed to settle the affair as far as he was concerned, for with his fingers he lifted another chunk of sausage to his mouth. Mucius did not give up. "We only wanted to know whether you received the news reports night before last at the censor's office," he said. "I did," Megabates said indistinctly, his mouth full. "What concern is it of yours?" "We should like to know who the courier was who brought the item about the desecration of the temple," Mucius said. "That's confidential information," Megabates said curtly. He sharpened the knife on the edge of the bowl and cut himself a thick slice of bread. "Please tell us," Mucius pleaded. "Who are you anyway?" Megabates demanded. "Mucius Marius Domitius." Megabates looked up startled. "Domitius? Are you by any chance related to His Excellency, the Honorable Tribune Domitius?" "He is my father," Mucius said as modestly as possible. Megabates jumped up, choked down his mouthful of bread, and bowed low. "Forgive me, young sir. Why didn't you say so at once? Has your father sent you?" Mucius nodded. A lie at a time like this didn't really count, after all. His friend's life was at stake. "My father is Senator Vinicius," Caius blurted out. Megabates bowed to him also. Of course," he stammered, confused. "Any information which is in my power to give," he agreed eagerly. "Let me think. Night before last. The report of the desecration of the temple. Ah, yes, I remember now. The courier came rather late, around the 4th hour of the night." The boys threw significant glances at one another. Xanthippus had guessed correctly. "He brought a sealed letter," Megabates continued, with the words "very urgent" on the outside. "I opened the letter and found the report on the desecration of the temple. It was written in shorthand, but it was long, extremely long, and was therefore a great nuisance to us. I personally would have liked to have told the courier to get out." "Why didn't you?" Antonius asked. "Why, how could I do that?" Megabates exclaimed in alarm. "The courier was sent by His Excellency, ex-consul Tellus." "Ex-consul Tellus?" the boys cried in amazement. "Yes," Megabates said, "by ex-consul Tellus in person." Okay, so this Tellus must be a very important person. Chapter 17, A Certain Guest. Xanthippus was as amazed as the boys when he heard the identity of the man who had sent the courier. Many years ago, ex-consul Tellus had been a famous general who defeated the Persians and Armenians and half a dozen other Oriental tribes. After a number of campaigns, he had returned home a hero, and with the millions he had gained in booty, retired to private life. So he had gotten a lot of the spoils of his of his wins. Since then his fame had somewhat faded, but he kept some sort of reputation alive by the expensive parties he gave in his huge palace in the gardens of Lucullus. Nevertheless, he was not popular. He was feared for his malicious tongue, that speech, and for his tremendous influence in social life and politics. He was a close friend of all the highest dignitaries, and it was said that the emperor himself had great faith in Tellus and told him all his plans. Xanthippus sat in his room, surrounded by books, papers, compasses, rulers, and other geometrical instruments. "Tellus," he said, placing his injured leg on a hassock. "Tellus! This certainly is a surprise. Of course, it beautifully confirms my theory about an important personage, but to tell the truth, I hadn't counted on anyone quite that important. Well, if it's so, it's so. We must not be put off by this. Let us consider this turn of events with cool heads, my young friends." The boys grinned flattered. This was the first time Xanthippus had ever offered to discuss a subject with the boys on a basis of equality. "It seems unlikely that Tellus has any connection with the crime," Xanthippus said. "What reason could an ex-consul have for engineering a crime to throw suspicion upon young Rufus?" Antonius spoke up. "Maybe he was envious because Rufus's father just won such a great victory over the Gauls. Generals are always jealous of each other. Pompey wanted to kill Caesar. Caesar wanted to kill Pompey. And afterwards Brutus killed Caesar and Antony killed Brutus. And my father knew a general who even killed himself because he was mad when another general won a battle." "That's enough!" Xanthippus interrupted him. "You can tell us about that during the history lesson." It is quite true that jealousy and envy will drive people to the most illogical actions, but Tellus himself was so successful a general that he does not have to begrudge his colleague Petronius a victory. Besides, at the time of the defacing of the temple, nobody in Rome knew anything about the victory. Otherwise, the news of it would have appeared in the morning newspaper. So the culprit must have had other motives, and for that reason I scarcely believe it was Tellus. A little reasoning should make that clear. Tellus is a person who lives only for his pleasure. And it is no pleasure to steal through the dark streets of Rome at night, to knock out harmless teachers, rob them, then smear up sacred buildings. Tellus can afford amusements of another sort. Furthermore, Tellus is a friend and intimate of the emperor. He would certainly think twice about risking his position of trust he now occupies, for he of all people would know the emperor does not take kindly to such jokes. And finally, how could Tellus have known that Caius and Rufus quarreled, and that Rufus's writing tablet was here in school? Shall I assume that one of you ran off to him and told him all about it? "No, no," the boys protested. Xanthippus tugged at his pointy beard. "Well, then you see that it cannot have been Tellus." "Hypothesis," Publius murmured in a low voice. Fortunately, Xanthippus did not hear him. So he was saying, "We will now consider the situation in another light," he continued. "Tellus sent the courier. There is no doubt about that. Nobody would dare to misuse the name of the mighty ex-consul. But Tellus may well have acted as the unsuspecting agent for the real culprit. A person living the way he does has many hangers-on. It's well known that he is a great admirer of actors and dancers and acrobats and other such characters. Now, I happen to know that the night of the desecration of the temple, Tellus gave one of his disgusting feasts. There is therefore the following possibility. One of his guests may have started the rumor of the desecration of the temple and have persuaded Tellus to send the courier to the newspaper. He would know that Tellus, as a friend of the emperor, would feel bound to make a fuss. The man lied, of course, for the temple had not yet been defaced, but then later he must have secretly slipped away from the banquet in order to commit the crime. Possibly he had had no chance to do it before, but he also wanted to cast suspicion on Rufus right from the start, and therefore he persuaded Tellus to send the report to the newspaper before the censor's office closed. Our next task is therefore, so who was this guest? Publius spoke up. Tellus's parties are always so large that we might just as well look for the criminal in the forum. Sarcasm gets us nowhere, Xanthippus reproved him. You are only trying to make up by impudence for the lack of intelligence. I know that Tellus's parties are very large, but the guest we are looking for will have certain distinguishing marks. For one thing, the route between his home and the palace of Tellus must have run by the temple of Minerva. Otherwise, he could not claim to have discovered the alleged desecration of the temple. When a man tells a lie like that, he must take care to make it plausible, believable. But it was dark then, so how could he have seen anything? Caius asked. A rich man out at night is accompanied by many slaves with torches and lanterns, Xanthippus said, and Tellus' guests are all rich. Naturally, there was nothing written on the temple at the time he passed, since he did it himself later on. The slaves also saw nothing, but then they probably knew nothing about his lie to ex-consul Tellus. Xanthippus got up and hobbled over to a map of Rome which hung on the wall. Now look, he said, to grasp the significance of this, you must follow me closely. Tellus's palace is over here in the gardens of Lucullus. Tellus's guests are high dignitaries, and almost all of them live near the imperial palace on the Palatine Hill. Their route, as you can see, leads directly across the Forum, past the Capitol, and along Broad Street to the gardens of Lucullus. Nobody would take the foolish roundabout route uphill and down across the Esquiline Hill, especially not at night. Guests who live on the Viminalis or Quirinalis are ruled out at the start, since the Temple of Minerva is in the opposite direction. Therefore, the question narrows down to those who live on the Esquiline Hill itself. But even at that, the Temple of Minerva is so out of the way that only 2 or 3 of them could possibly pass it. We can therefore confine our attention to a very small number of persons. Xanthippus limped back to his easy chair and sat down. The boys were much impressed by this exposition, but they did not know how to go on from there. What if the guest himself did not do it, but ordered one of his slaves to? Julius suggested. Xanthippus shook his head. That is practically out of the question, he said. You all know the proverb, the most dangerous part of a slave is his tongue. No rich man would entrust a slave with an important secret unless he could not help himself. He would be too afraid of the slave's talking or using blackmail. A rich man has to commit his own crimes if he wants to sleep peacefully. This too struck the boys as sound reasoning. But how were they ever going to pin the blame on the mysterious guest? For all that Xanthippus had so cleverly narrowed a circle around him, there still were a great many people living in the vicinity of the Temple of Minerva. The boys could not very well go from door to door asking, Excuse us, please, but are you the man who wrote Caius as a dumbbell on the temple wall? Why don't we just go to Tellus and ask him? Mucius proposed. But Xanthippus was opposed to that. That wouldn't help us at all and might even lead to trouble, he said. Tellus is friends with everybody who counts. He would not want to offend anyone and will therefore answer no questions. Tellus is a politician, and in politics, one hand washes the other. We won't ever find the man then, Julius said, losing heart. All we can do is ask the help of the gods. We ought to bring them a sacrifice. Well now, there's no use running to unnecessary expense, Xanthippus countered. The gods help those who help themselves. For the present, we can try another plan. And I happen to know another fact about Tellus which will be useful to us. Although Tellus gives the impression of caring for nothing but pleasure, he is really always looking out for his personal future. A politician never knows whether he may not fall into disgrace someday, and at such times it is well to have old friends to depend on. But when things are going badly for a man, old friends have a way of forgetting their friendship. Tellus is cunning. He's sly. He has a sort of guest book, and he asks all his guests to sign their names in it. Naturally, each of them feels honored and important when the rich and famous ex-consul makes such a request. But Tellus's guest book is not just an ordinary scroll which might be lost or destroyed. It is a white marble wall in the great hall of his palace. Tellus has had a special red paint made which is not washable. And the guests paint their names on the wall with a brush. Over each list of names is placed the date of the feast at which the guests were present. That is very handy for us. since the name of the guest we are interested in will be under the 20th of March. But how can we get a look at this guest list? Mucius asked. I have a plan in mind, Xanthippus replied. But it hinges on someone's being able to commit to memory all the names. There may have been 15, 20, or even more guests at this affair. So which of you has a good memory? Me, Antonius burst out. I have a terrific memory. I even remember when I lay in my cradle. It was awful. I couldn't talk yet. All I could do was say, Father, Mother, and that made me so mad that I cried all the time. Can you remember when you were in your cradle? That is not any special feat of memory, Xanthippus said dryly. I too remember lying in my cradle. The boys broke into peals of laughter. There was something irresistibly funny about the idea of their teacher Xanthippus ever having been a baby. Quiet, Xanthippus snapped. If you want to laugh, do it at home or in the streets. I will not have laughter in my presence. Julius spoke up. Antonius really does have a good memory. He only has to read something once, and he knows it by heart. If that is so, why does he never know his list of Greek words? Xanthippus commented. That's because he never looks at them, Caius murmured. Are you all of the opinion that Antonius has the best memory among you? Xanthippus asked. Yes, the boys agreed, Antonius joining the chorus. All right, then, Xanthippus said, not very enthusiastically. Then we have no choice. We must send him to tell us. Me? Antonius cried, overwhelmed. You are to take him a letter from me, Xanthippus said. A few years ago, I did some historical research for Tellus, so that he knows me. I will write and ask him to put in a good word for Rufus with the emperor. He will toss my petition into his wastebasket unread, but that does not matter. You take the letter to the palace and say you are to wait for an answer. Here are 10 sesterces. Give them to the doorkeeper so that he will let you in. He will lead you into the great hall where the marble wall with the list of names is, and while the letter is being taken to Tellus and you are waiting for the reply, you will have time enough to look for the names under the 20th of March and to learn them by heart. But then hurry straight back here and don't linger on the way. When we have the names, we will know where the people live. It will then be easy to find the man we want. Xanthippus hastily wrote a few lines on a parchment, rolled it up, and gave it to Antonius. All right, be off with you. You should be back within an hour at the latest. I'll be back a lot sooner than that, Antonius said, and he scooted out the door. Why can't we all go? Mucius asked in disappointment. More than one would make for awkwardness, Xanthippus said. Besides, you would only distract Antonius. He must be free to concentrate completely on all those names. So now we have to sit around here for an hour doing nothing? Caius said grumpily. I should think not, Xanthippus snapped. As long as you are here, you may just as well learn something. Where, by the way, is the homework I assigned you? Homework? Caius asked, pretending innocence. You were supposed to write out the Greek words in fair hand 10 times. Oh, that, Caius mumbled. I was sick. So you were sick, were you? Xanthippus mimicked him. Too bad. You are looking very well today. Here is a tablet and a stylus. Go into the schoolroom and get to work. And you others, you can each take a volume of Sallust from my shelf over there and study a little Roman history. The boys picked out the books, went into the classroom, and sat down on the benches. Caius stared unhappily down at his writing tablet. He no longer had the slightest idea what Greek words he was supposed to write. The others were not in a very industrious mood either. They'd never liked Sallust anyway, and their minds were all on Antonius. What a shame, each boy was thinking, that it was Antonius who had the best memory and not himself. So, Antonius is going over to see Tellus, the ex-consul. Very interesting. See you later.